yes. The conversation continues here at Midlife Crisis Podcast. This is episode number 9. I'm your host, Jim Whelan, part of the Port Chops Sports Family Network here in Mattawa, New Jersey. Dave Sergio's in the building, making me look good, making me sound good. Today, we're talking a little bit about the NIL deals and the NCAA basketball, and also about the Ed O'Bannon case. Episode number 1, Bob Hurley alerted to about Ed O'Bannon, wanting to get paid, how the NCAA gets missed that, and also with Seth Greenberg. In another episode, just talking about the NIL, the current state of college basketball. My next guest was instrumental in the plaintiff, Ed O'Bannon, and the case that led to amateurism, and also led to the current system here. He is a lawyer out in California. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Jon King to the Midlife Crisis Podcast. I just want to talk a little bit about NIL. I was reading Court Justice book, and also Ed O'Bannon, and you're mentioning there. You just start off. Ed O'Bannon says that you had a good connection with him, and you're a walk-on at Santa Clara. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your basketball career. And did you play with Steve Nash, or was that a little before your time? Or
he was just after my time. Some of the guys that I played with wound up playing with him, so there was a bit of a connection there. But I was about as opposite of Ed O'Bannon as you could imagine. I walked on to Santa Clara. I was as much a fan of the game as a player. I just loved it. So I had gone to some basketball camps there and gave it my all, a year and a half, and I just listened to your last podcast and show about Prop 48, and yes. I had no problem getting into college, but my problem was going to be staying in. I wasn't going to class. I wasn't doing anything academically. So a little ways in, I just realized, like, I am going to flunk out of here. I'm paying my own way. I don't have a scholarship, and I got to hit the books. But I loved basketball so much and could relate, to a tiny degree to somebody like Ed O'Bannon, just knowing what a Division I schedule is like, the day to day, and so I was able to just connect with him, but was in awe of him and his accomplishments, but he was also an excellent face of the case and a spokesperson who could just explain his own experiences. And what helped made that case successful is, one of the things that was really important is Ed. If we had someone else that was the name on the case, the face on the case, had some baggage or controversy, it could have gone a whole different way. So he was almost like the perfect person. When people thought of him, it's like, oh yeah, Ed O'Bannon, I remember him, man, national championship, UCLA. Yeah. So long story short, I was able to connect with him on that level, as much of an appreciator of his basketball abilities, but also relate a little bit to having played the game.
Yeah, and I'm coming from New Jersey, so he got drafted by the Nets, so I saw him play, professionally. So just talk a little bit about your start. I read somewhere about, I guess after Santa Clara, you ended up going to law school, and I guess you had like an NFL case with Dan Pastorini. He was the I think he was the Houston Oilers quarterback. What was that case, and how did that lead to the next?
Well, one of the things that happened with the O'Bannon case, it got a lot of attention and publicity. And when a case is like that, it tends to bring out individuals with similar issues or ideas. And that led to a bunch of former NFL players like Dan Pastorini. Fred Dreyer was also involved, if you remember him, and went on to become a very well-known actor. They had real concerns about how their images were being used forever in NFL films, great products. I think they're based in New Jersey. At the time they were, at least, as well, their headquarters, and all the great videos and movies and highlight things about seasons. So they stepped forward to attempt to address that issue. Basically, how did the NFL get those rights? Why weren't the former players being paid in the, as they continue to be used? And both of those cases started with the idea of about former players, but who kind of live on forever in the use of their images. Could be video games, posters, jerseys, all these things. And so the O'Bannon case really led to a series of things like that, with people just questioning things that used to be taken for granted, like, oh yeah, like you're an amateur, you can't be paid, or yeah, you must have given away those rights somewhere. But it led to a much greater scrutiny on how did all of this happen.
Yeah, and then reading his book, I guess, Sonny Vaccaro, I mean, here in New Jersey, he had the ABCD camps, and he worked for Nike. He was, he was in that movie Air, which was successful. So, like, how did the case come about? I know, like, Ed O'Bannon said he was at a friend's house and he saw his image, on an EA Sports thing. But, like, how did that gain traction in order to kind of, hey, we have something here, NCAA should be held to task? Like, how did that kind of get to the forefront?
I don't think I could even overstate the importance of Sonny Vaccaro to the entire situation. And it tied back actually to when I was in high school in the San Francisco Bay Area. Like I said earlier, I was just a tremendous fan of basketball as well as a player. And so at the time there was no internet, but I found out there was something called Basketball Times, a weekly, or maybe it was a monthly newspaper that you could subscribe to, and it would show up and it would have all this information about, a lot of it was about East Coast stuff, like who are the high school players. I remember like Alonzo Mourning, reading about these guys in high school, and kind of all the goings on, the camps, everything. And then to some degree, college basketball was in there as well. But at the back of that, Sonny Vaccaro would have a column, pretty much, it seemed like every edition. And I learned through there about him, about the camps, and also his relationship with the shoe and apparel companies like Nike. But what I remember at that time, even noticing, he was very frequently criticizing in writing things the NCAA was doing, and always was concerned about hypocrisy and fairness. And he probably even wrote about Proposition 48, which was the subject of your last show, which I really enjoyed.
Thank you.
So yeah, it was excellent. So those are the kind of things he was weighing in on. And even at the time, I thought, this is pretty amazing. This guy who seems to be a part of the industry, he's going against the sort of biggest dog out there and calling them out over and over and over. So to bring it full circle, after I was an attorney, I was working at a class action firm on the plaintiff's side, the group that does the suing. And that firm was focusing a lot on antitrust cases. And so one day I was on vacation, but we would call in every week still just to hear what's going on. There'd be a new case meeting, sort of like, here's some possibilities. Here's some people with ideas that have contacted us. What do we think? And I was sitting there. I remember I was in Arizona, actually going to some NCAA tournament games. It must have been around March. But there was I heard on this call, kind of muffled, hey, some guy named Sonny Vaccaro called in, left a message. He's talking about like sports issues, and we're not really sure that he sounds legitimate. I don't know. We get a million of inquiries like that. Yeah. And so I just about jumped through the phone. And did you just say Sonny Vaccaro? Like, we need to take this meeting, whatever he's got in mind. It's going to be something interesting. This is definitely a major figure in sports. So only because really I had remembered him from all my high school stuff and then saw his name, forever after that. That particular group of lawyers were not necessarily major sports fans, which I think helped them take a fresh look. But long story short, it led to then setting up a meeting in Los Angeles with me, Sonny, his wife, who was a great part of the team, and then one other attorney we didn't even know what he had in mind. And what he had in mind led to everything involving the O'Bannon case and a lot of things that came after. And independently, he also had been talking to Ed O'Bannon about these issues, especially the video games, just kind of like troubling Ed. But like most people, he didn't know what to do with it until Sonny said, "Hey, I'm talking to this law firm that might be able to help do something about this." So long story, but just the different worlds collided of sports and the right people and the right time. And
Well,
without
that's
that,
amazing.
it may have never happened in the way that it all had.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on vacation, you could probably said, forget it. I'm not getting on this call, and that probably would have changed in a different direction. But
Yeah, you never know. I mean, I'm sure people would continue to be raising things, but but the combination of Sonny, Ed, the right law firms, the right time, social media, I think has had a lot to do with it, with people able to communicate about these things. So interesting little moment in sports history, I would say there.
And then, why do you think Sonny Vaccaro picked Ed O'Bannon? Was it kind of almost like it was like a Branch Rickey, Jackie Robinson type of scenario? You needed to have the right person in front so everybody can kind of get behind them. Is that a good comparison, or
That the way you just said that was perfectly, and I didn't even fully think of it, but looking back, that is what it was, because we had talked to a number of potential people, and understandably, sometimes they would get cold feet, going, "I support you guys, but boy, my name on this, like, what's going to happen?" Sometimes people would even say, understandably, like, "I've got some kids that might be able to play in college, like, this could hurt them," real world, understandable concerns. But Ed had that captain mentality for sure of, why not him? He's going to step forward. He can take the heat. He can take whatever flack might be out there. And I think Sonny recognized too that there was just nothing anybody could say bad about Ed O'Bannon. If anything, in his professional career, as you mentioned, you're familiar with, he was drafted with the New Jersey Nets.
Mm-hmm.
He had injury issues and kind of lingering things that I think never fully allowed him to reach his true ultimate potential through no fault of his own. He did go on to a lengthy career around the world in other countries, but I think also that if anything made him even more relatable, because people could understand, like, not everybody winds up just set for life and a multimillionaire in sports. Like, he, had to go around the world, keep trying to play and earn a living and support his family. So it's sort of, in other words, if everything had just worked out perfectly for him along the way, he may have been less relatable and therefore not such a compelling person to lead this type of issue for everybody.
And then what you mentioned before, even Ed O'Bannon, he had concerns too. I was reading in his book, when you spoke, he had concerns like, why me, and why, is it the right time for me to kind of step forward and be the face? Yeah. When you had first conversations with him, when you first met, after Sonny Vaccaro made the introduction, he even expressed to you like what you said, why me? What makes me different than anybody else? And also, I have a family, a wife, a job, and one thing I guess interesting, you said like, he's not gonna get paid for it. It's like almost like he's gonna be the first one through the door. He's gonna get all the flack, but he's not probably gonna reap the benefits for it either.
Right. It's just a remarkable testament to his leadership. He certainly didn't need to do it, for any reason other than he felt it was the right thing to do. I mean, it's pretty stunning for somebody to do that, in my experience, to just step forward. And there are a lot of people out there who don't like the concept of these cases, don't like where it's led with the NIL money and transfers and all these sort of things. So to a certain group of people, he is heroic. And then there are others who, at least at the time, may have been like, what are you doing? When I was in touch with him during the case, we did some interviews for shows like HBO Real Sports, Frontline on PBS, and a lot of filming and things were done where Ed was working at a car dealership in the Las Vegas area. And I think it helped that he had a very supportive employer, who was totally on board with letting us do things there. But in other situations, you could see somebody, not having that support and being worried, well, was my boss going to fire me because he's upset when I'm, so it's just, he was a remarkable person to be involved with this. You can't even really explain it. He just did it. He led it. He just stepped forward,
And then that's the other thing. I think the con argument is like these players are getting a free education. Like I like my son, I got 2 kids at college, but my one's, getting the tuition payments. It's a lot to sacrifice to the family. So the con was like that now they're getting a free education. But I mean, I remember reading in a local paper here, or actually online, I guess it was at LSU. There was a something with a coach there, and in the comments, the majority of the people about players getting paid. This is before everything kind of broke with the NIL. The comments, people were supportive of the players getting paid. So there's I think there's public support behind it. But do you think like now it's a little bit like, does that get reined in a little bit as far as or like is the NIL, is it just, do you see any pitfalls with NIL as far as what the current state now with it and players are?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and you tied together a couple of interesting things there, which I spent a good part of my time in these cases talking to people about and hearing concerns, because I was always thinking, if your average sports fan or even non-sports fan has thoughts about these issues, there's a good chance the judges will have these thoughts, the juries, people. So on the education part, one thing that I was able to bring to my experience from my very limited, walk-on basketball player experience is, even for me, I was not living like a regular student. The demands, even then, and we're talking 1988, 89, 90, some in that era of, it was all I could do to just get myself to practice. After practice is then weight training. Got to hit the weights. We're doing that. Film study, an everyday occurrence where you're either watching prior games or film of upcoming opponents that the coaches have sliced and diced, for us to prepare, looking at written scouting reports, then hoping to just make it to the cafeteria before it closes, trying to eat enough. I was a skinny guy, always trying to put on weight, trying to replace all those calories. And so then in talking to the real deal athletes that became a part of these cases, prominent Power 5 conference players, I realized very quickly the educational experience is vastly different from them. The goal there is simply eligibility to satisfy NCAA guidelines. They're not regular students. They can't take things in the afternoon like other students can. So it's a different world. Yes, it's still a nice problem to have because you might come out of there with a college degree, but they are, I'm sure it's even more so now. They're living in a different world. We're calling them students, but they have obligations that are beyond belief for everybody else. So the NIL money for name, image, and likeness, it's a crazy time to see how quickly things have changed just in the last few years, where it went from players can't be paid, then it was players can be paid for their name, image, and likeness, but it can't be boosters of schools. Then very quickly it became, well, it's actually okay if it is the boosters putting together these collectives, and players can be paid now, but the schools will not be paying the players. So if you're, and that's probably going to change very quickly, at least at the top level. We're talking Power Five conferences. It's a different world, as you know. If you go watch Division II basketball, Division III, junior college, there's all kinds of stuff out there that is college sports, but really different. But at the top of the heap, we're trying to do this experiment unique to America, I would say, of jamming together college education, huge amounts of money for coaches, massive $1 billion TV deals. And I think we're just in a period of transition where, I mean, my kids now, they're 15, 14. They really have only come to consciousness about college sports in the image where NIL exists. They don't even really understand that it didn't used to happen. So I think in a few years, a lot of this will be sorted out, settled. We'll have probably a new version of Division I for the power conferences, and life will go on. People will still watch, which is the key, because what else are we going to do with our Saturdays? Or I don't know what I'd do with my March without watching college basketball.
It's the best month of the year, for me,
Yeah.
So just, and then in the book, it kind of alluded that you were with a law firm. And then when we spoke to set up this interview, you said there was other people behind you. You were basically, in the forefront, but there was a whole team of people, but there was a break in the law firm, but you said you were still involved, with this case. So, I mean, can you talk about a little bit what happened in the law firm, and then how you kind of picked it up somewhere else?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really glad you made that point, because cases like the O'Bannon case and these similar big ones are the product of many dozens of attorneys, often dozens of law firms, all joining together to pool resources, expertise. And it's a lot like a sports team where, you might have your veterans, you have your rookies, you might have sort of the glue guys that can kind of talk to everybody, maybe not the most, genius level performer, and everybody in between. You have people that don't know anything about sports, which can be really helpful because they look at things totally fresh. Some of us as sports fans might go, yeah, they can't be paid, they're amateurs. But some of the attorneys involved would look at this like, well, why not? Like, where does that come from? And dive into the history of it. And then lots of firms joining together to add money, because these cases have to be paid for. Nobody gets paid unless it's successful. So hiring expert economists, all these people. So a big group of people. And my role was probably being a bridge to be able to talk to all these different groups. Like, there were attorneys for sure. If you said, hey, what do you think about what's going on with the SEC? They would say, oh, you mean the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission? Well, whereas your sports guy would be, okay, you're talking Southeastern Conference, Power Five, they run the NCAA, so, but collectively, it can work, it can function. So, but one of the things, you may have had this experience where class actions can get a bad name, and a class action means there's the lead plaintiff, like Ed O'Bannon, but he is standing in the shoes and on behalf of thousands of others like him to be representative. And so if there's a settlement or a victory, all of those people benefit, but someone like Ed O'Bannon is the window in which the court can learn about the experiences of, what, in his case, what it's like to be an athlete, how is his image being used. But where class actions get a bad name, you may have had this experience. Sometimes people get a check in the mail for a settlement, and it'll say something like, oh, I got $1.35 from my phone company. I don't know if this is even worth the gas money to go try to deal with this at my bank. So they can be settled in a way in which the lawyers can get a lot of money and the actual people sometimes can get nothing, or even have to turn in some form and maybe they'll get something in 2 years. Who knows? So I was very close with the players and wanting this thing to work out, even if that meant we go down swinging, because athletes like that, they'd rather lose and fight till the end than just give up and go, okay, well, we're just going to quit here. So there, just to summarize it, there could be tension in those worlds about whether a case should settle, when, what would a settlement look like, who would the money actually go to. And I was outspoken on a lot of things because I knew what was at stake for the players and things. It wasn't just another case to me for whatever reason or another thing. So led to a split, some bad blood for sure with me and the first firm. But in that case, there were two firms appointed by the court to run the whole thing, to oversee it. And quickly, the other firm asked me to come join them and work with them, which was really nice. Was very, very happy. So I could just continue on in the college sports cases. And just then they were getting a lot of ideas for follow-up college sports cases, building on O'Bannon and the issues about video games and all that. And those issues led to ones about what college scholarships cover and don't cover. And college scholarships used to cover the cost of what it actually would require to live like a regular student, laundry money, all those things, not just your tuition and room and board, but gradually there became a shortfall of several $1,000s per year of what the schools would publish, what they call the cost of attendance, but the athletic scholarship would be way short of that. So you wound up having these players that couldn't afford to get food after the cafeteria closed, were going into debt, things that, yes, regular students do as well. But when it was contrasted with the billions of dollars being brought in, it led to a lot of cases about making up that gap, and it led to some big settlements in cases that all sort of started with really hypocrisy, is what I'd say. It all goes, there's too much money involved for players. And there was in our world, there was a famous incident. I think it was a UConn player who, during the March Madness tournament, was interviewed on camera and just said something like, I'm having to go to bed hungry at night sometimes because I just don't have the money to, and that just led to a lot of attention and focus on the economics of
what's going on here. So even with Ed O'Bannon, I guess surprisingly, I guess Oscar Robertson, Bill Russell, David Lattin, and Henry Flournoy from Texas West, they kind of got behind him. So automatically he had instant credibility, that he had such big names going behind him and saying, hey, this is what's going on here, and that we agree with Ed O'Bannon. So when we spoke, you talked a little bit about the Sean Austin case. Everybody knows about the first case, but not too much about the second case. But I guess he was involved with West Virginia running back, and I guess the quarterback Major Harris. I guess so. What was difference in that case between Ed O'Bannon's case and that, or is it similar?
Well, so the Alston case was one of these, like I was mentioning, that had to do with why doesn't the athletic scholarship cover lots of other things like extra books? Sometimes there are books that are not required but recommended. I keep mentioning laundry, but laundry costs a lot of money these days. Like, how do you do your laundry? These things. So his case, he was one of the class representatives on that issue of why doesn't the scholarship cover more that is needed, and that led to a settlement with the NCAA of several $100 million. This time done in the right way, which is the money just passed out, checks issued, large checks, like a good process. Then that case morphed into going forward. Well, what about other things? Why can't schools, if they want, provide internships for players, send them on like a summer abroad study thing, provide for graduate school scholarships, a bunch of things related to education, but beyond just the simple scholarship. And to make a long legal saga short, that eventually went up to the US Supreme Court, who absolutely blasted the NCAA in a very strong opinion, and basically said, whatever the NCAA is trying to say here about amateurism is necessary to protect something here is absolutely bunk, basically. So like unanimous just blasting of them. And that really accelerated then what you're seeing now, because the writing was on the wall with that decision. It didn't have to address the core idea of, can schools pay players directly? But everyone could read the tea leaves going, if that court got a case like that again, it very likely would not side with the NCAA. So you've seen the acceleration of the NCAA allowing the NIL payments from the booster collectives and all of those things. And now there's a lot of effort to see whether that could be regulated better or reined in. And you've got players switching schools because of that. So we're in a new time of change, but basically the legal system has generally finally responded and just told the NCAA, we don't believe you anymore, the things you say. So that's kind of where, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. But like, what do you see like the next pitfall then for the current system? You know, are kids going to get promised a certain amount of money and it doesn't pan out? Like, what in the current system? I mean, obviously, you know, Ed O'Bannon case, it's all right. They're using my name, image, and likeness. You know, I should be paid for that. But like, what's the next? Because people I talked to on this show, they basically said, you know, it's like almost like the Wild Wild West. It's got to get reined in somehow. I mean, do you agree with that? And do you think that, you know, what kind of, you know, firewalls would you like to see put in the current system, or do you think it's good in the system the way it is now?
Well, that's a great question. I had left the college sports cases for a while because honestly, it was affecting my viewing and enjoyment of sports. Sometimes you know too much, you know. But I just got brought back. I got refreshed and just was brought back into one about what they call second transfers in sports, players that have transferred multiple times. And the NCAA just a few weeks ago reversed course because they were sued by 7 state attorney generals and have allowed second transfers. But it upsets a lot of people, the player movement, and coupled with the NIL money, it's making people wonder what's going on. The player they're rooting for one year, is that player going to be here next year? But the way I would put it is like this, which is every quote unquote problem going on has been addressed for many decades in professional sports already, including through the efforts of people like Oscar Robertson, who you mentioned. But you know, way back when was in some lawsuits involving the NBA and the ABA and mergers and unions and collective bargaining, free agency, all those things. Every issue we talk about, there is a very easy way to address it that may be unpopular, but is some type of collective representation, whether we call it a union or not, with solid representatives, legal representatives, bargaining people who who truly represent the athletes on the one hand and can negotiate with who's ever representing college sports, whether it's the conferences or the NCAA, and reach agreements and deals. Otherwise, there is going to be endless lawsuits. Every time the NCAA attempts to put in some new rule and say, we're going to regulate NIL, do something like that, they will be sued, and very likely successfully sued, because that's going to violate the antitrust laws. But when you have unions, those are exempt from the antitrust laws. So I know that it's hard to imagine, but that's the only solution I really see. Then everything is addressed, just like in pro sports. We got concussion issues, that's addressed through the concussion protocol negotiated in football with the NFL and the Players Association. And I think if it's not that, it's going to be forever tinkering and probably upsetting to people, because that is the free market. The free market is going to do what it's going to do. People are going to go where the money is, and we totally respect that in other walks of life, but it upsets people in college sports. So I hope it gets to the point where we can stop kind of rehashing these issues over and over in the legal system and just get to like a negotiation that people, and it probably only affects those top conferences. In basketball, that can extend out to, there's a lot more smaller conferences that do well, especially in the tournament, but to sit down like any other business deal and figure this out in a common sense way. So that's where I think it has to go. Otherwise, every year will bring some new controversy, it seems.
Yeah.
Like.
Well, I mean, it's a weird, like the NIL. It's like, I don't know. Are you dealing with the parents? Or are you dealing with the player itself? I mean, if the player's a minor, like, do they, can they agree on, so, there's players that did a verbal agreement, or they did a letter of intent, and then they're, so it's like, there's a lot of elasticity in the current system right now. It's just like, and I think people understand it's going to get reined in, but you want to get reined in the right way, and then you want to have people get exploited either.
Right. So. Yeah. That is a really good point. Is yes, for the most part, the players are above 18. I mean, I was looking back, I actually was 17 when I started college, and we raised this issue a little bit in the O'Bannon case, is if people are signing paperwork at 17, giving away rights or whatever, but for the most part, people are 18 and over coming in, but there is no possible way your average 18-year-old or 20-year-old, for that matter, can understand and negotiate complex legal rights while they're also trying to be athletes and also trying to be students and also just trying to be young people. So it is truly, I think, a unique American issue. Like from what I understand, other countries do not combine huge amounts of money and education and sports, So you're right. I think there has to be some recognition. We can call people adults, but they need real help and real representation. And that is what a good union can do, where you have the union leaders, and the union also has attorneys and people who by law have to put the best interests of their clients ahead of everything else. Now, I know unions sometimes don't achieve those, ideals, but yeah, you're right. Leaving things up to just young, I'd call them kids, even though they're, 18 to 20, 22, whatever. Big money at stake, verbal promises, like you said, it's a challenge. So what you might see is legislation or something at the political level. The NCAA has been after that for years, if not decades. And it's always a challenge to get the government to do something and to regulate something, but there's a good argument to be made. That's what it may take as well. Some kind of actual force of law, like here's how this will all work.
And then lastly, I mean, just And thanks for your time, John. But like you hung out your own shingle now, you have your own law firm. Like what cases do you handle now, and where you're practicing out of? So if somebody is watching this, like what you hear, like what kind of cases do you handle?
I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and as I mentioned earlier, I have kids that basically grew up during all of these NCAA cases with me, and one challenge is those are typically national cases where I'd go all over the country, flying all over the place, and it just for depositions of the
Yeah,
clients and meetings, and it just became too much time away from home. So I switched to keeping things local and representing people that have been subject to discrimination in law enforcement is one of the things I think I've focused on, and
yeah,
I think you have a relationship to that,
yeah,
and people who work at prisons, but generally things that are local representatives of district attorneys' offices, investigators, and things. So always on the plaintiff side, fighting against some type of thing, but as I mentioned, I am interested a little bit in doing some more NCAA things and
yeah,
trying to help just get things on the right track. But one of the things all of those cases have in common, whether it's the college athletes cases or these other things I mentioned, is I'm always looking for the hypocrisy, which is the company says one thing publicly,
yeah,
behind the scenes, it does the other thing. And that's something that makes or breaks a case. I think when judges look at things, if you show them enough, like this is not what it seems, it can lead to something being successful. So the good thing I think about the college sports cases is a lot more stuff is out on the table now. I mean,
yeah.
the old days, I'm sure we all
Yeah,
remember,
there was a
you had boosters given the duffel bags of cash, and
Yeah, and giving to uncles, or buying houses, or $20 handshakes, or whatever else there was. It was you know
yeah,
it,
it goes always is going to go on. So why don't we just get it out in
it,
the open and make it above board? And that's kind of the hope. So I do, and all of these firms involved, they've done a great job, fighting and keeping the issues alive. And it's fun to see, but I do recognize not fun for everybody, and it it can be equally upsetting to a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
fans who are concerned about like what's going on. So.
Well, it makes good debate. So listen, John, I appreciate your time. Hopefully, if this podcast continues, I come back and revisit as this NIL evolves and everything. Good luck in your law firm, and thanks for your time, and thanks for agreeing to come on with me. I really appreciate you explaining, and also talking a little bit about the Ed O'Bannon case, which is definitely uh, it made all this possible as far as getting players paid. So anyway,
Yeah,
thank you
thank
for
you.
your time.
I love your show and have enjoyed all the episodes, and good
Uh,
luck going forward.
Thanks, John. I guess you're the one. So you're the one. So,
All right.
all
Take
right.
care.
Take care. Best of luck to you. Thank
You
you.
too. Thank you.
Bye. Bye. I want to thank John for his time here explaining about the Ed O'Bannon case. You can read about it, but in Ed O'Bannon's book, Court Justice. John is mentioned in that book. He's also mentioned in a couple other cases, Dan Pastorini, and also Sean Austin with West Virginia University football. And real interesting guests, different side of sports affecting the sports climate today. And the conversation is going to continue, whether right, wrong, players can be paid, how much should you get paid, everything else. But thank you for your time. Look forward to another episode in a couple weeks. Hope you enjoy this one. Hope you enjoy this show. Like, save, subscribe, share. Follow me on Twitter, formerly now called X, at Whalebones. Thank you very much.